Imagine this. You walk into a room and without saying a word, without touching her, without even looking directly at her, she starts to feel something shift inside. Her voice softens, her guard lowers, and suddenly, she finds herself wanting your approval more than anything. Not because you begged for it, not because you tried to impress her, but because you understood something about her emotions that most men will never grasp. This video is not about manipulation. It's about mastering a kind of influence so subtle, so refined, that it bypasses her defenses and speaks directly to her instincts. What I'm about to share with you is psychological, primal, and backed by years deconstructing what truly drives female emotional behavior, not only through seduction literature like Neil Strauss's The Game or Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction, but through actual behavioral patterns that most women aren't even consciously aware of. And once you learn how to use this power, she'll never be able to see you the same way again. Here's the truth. Women are not driven by logic when it comes to attraction. They are driven by feeling. That feeling is shaped by anticipation, uncertainty, emotional spikes, and how you subtly make her feel about herself when she's around you. The man who can regulate a woman's emotional experience, not control it in the obvious way, but orchestrate it like a composer playing with silence and sound, will always be remembered. Women don't fall for the man who tries too hard. They fall for the man who knows exactly when to give and when to withhold. And this begins with one core principle: emotional pacing. Most men either dump their attention too soon or starve her of it completely. The true seducer understands timing. He gives just enough attention to awaken her curiosity, and then pulls back just enough to make her wonder if she imagined the connection. This tug-of-war creates an emotional dissonance in her mind, and the brain, as psychologists like Dr. Helen Fisher have shown, craves resolution. When you introduce moments of emotional tension, then subtly relieve them, she associates you with that emotional release. This is the first stage of subtle control. She starts to seek you, not for who you are logically, but for how you make her feel when she can't predict you. Now here's where it gets even more powerful. You don't need to say anything extraordinary to trigger this emotional spiral. It's not about fancy lines or alpha posturing, it's about emotional contrast. If you're warm in one moment and then cool in the next, not out of mood swings but deliberate modulation, her mind subconsciously tries to recalibrate. And that search for equilibrium creates a tension that pulls her closer. It's the same principle casinos use when they give a small win just after a few losses. It keeps the brain hooked. But in this case, you become the reward system. Let me give you a real-world example. Think of the guy who, in a conversation, listens attentively, shows deep presence, laughs at her joke, then suddenly checks his phone, breaks eye contact, and casually shifts the conversation to something else. Most men would avoid this, thinking they're being rude. But to a woman emotionally invested, this sudden drop in validation creates a moment of tension. And that tension, when left unresolved, amplifies her desire to regain your focus. You've just disrupted her emotional pattern, and that disruption becomes addictive. What you're doing here is applying the principle of emotional anchoring, something Ross Jeffries, an early pioneer in seduction psychology, talked about, even if in more controversial ways. You're creating emotional spikes that get unconsciously tied to you. Over time, she doesn't just think of you when she's happy. She thinks of you when she's feeling. That's the leverage. But if you want this to work long-term, you need something deeper than just tactics. You need to embody what I call calm dominance. This is the state where your energy is unshakable. You're not reactive, you're not over-available, you're emotionally grounded. Women are biologically wired to respond to emotional stability in a man, especially in a world where their own emotions can be turbulent. If you become that anchor, she will chase your presence without understanding why. Now let me be clear. This is not about playing hard to get. That's too obvious. It's about becoming the man who triggers her emotions without being obvious about it. The difference between a player and a master seducer is that the player tries to manipulate the outcome, while the seducer manages perception. He knows that attraction doesn't come from chasing her. It comes from creating emotional friction and then becoming the source of its release. That's why emotional unpredictability, when done right, is one of the most powerful tools you can use. But there's a fine line here. You're not being erratic, you're being deliberate. You're setting the tempo. Imagine you're a DJ in a club. You don't play the same beat the whole night. You slow it down, you build it up, you drop the bass at the right moment. That emotional rhythm, when applied to interactions with a woman, can make you unforgettable. I want you to think about the last time a woman kept texting you for no clear reason. It wasn't because you said something magical. It was probably because at some point she felt uncertainty. That uncertainty creates a void. And human psychology abhors a void. We want resolution, we want closure, but when she can't quite figure you out, she becomes addicted to the possibility of doing so. And you become that puzzle. This is what Robert Greene refers to as the power of presence, when your absence is felt just as deeply as your attention. That's where most men fail. They give either too much or too little. They don't know how to modulate. They don't create emotional tension. They either overwhelm her or bore her, and then they wonder why she loses interest. But the man who can keep her dancing between security and uncertainty, that man lives in her mind rent-free. I'm going to go even deeper into how this works, how you can combine ancient Stoic principles, emotional mastery, and seductive psychology into a strategy that makes her feel like she needs your presence without you ever having to chase. But first, let this sink in. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to impress her with money, looks, or status. You just need to understand the one truth most men ignore. The more you understand how to shape a woman's emotions, the less you'll ever have to rely on words. Now let's peel back another layer. Emotional influence doesn't always begin with interaction. It begins much earlier, with the emotional atmosphere you create the moment you enter her space. Women are hypersensitive to subtext. They pick up on energy before they even process your words. If you walk into a room and carry tension, insecurity, or the need for approval, she senses it immediately, even if you're smiling. But if you carry emotional self-containment, calm, unfazed, present, she feels the difference without understanding why. That's the first silent message. I don't need anything from you. And that is intoxicating. Because the moment she realizes you're not trying to get her, she starts wondering why. You've already reversed the dynamic. Subtle control also happens through your ability to create emotional redirection. Let's say she brings up something provocative, trying to spark drama or test your frame. This is common. Instead of reacting, you pivot the emotional energy with a calm, grounded comment that deflates the charge. She says something sarcastic, expecting you to bite. Instead, you look at her, smirk slightly, and say, "Interesting way to ask for attention." Now you are framing the emotional reality, not her. This isn't just witty banter. It's a display of emotional mastery. You're taking her negative momentum and redirecting it into intrigue. That shift, small as it seems, is deeply felt, because it communicates this. You are the thermostat, not the thermometer. Another powerful form of subtle control lies in emotional foreshadowing. When you hint at an emotional future without making promises, you guide her mind to imagine experiences that haven't happened yet. And the brain, as Dr. Joe Dispenza explains, doesn't fully distinguish between imagination and memory. So when you say something like, "You're trouble," I can already see you making things complicated. With a half smile, you're planting a seed. A playful warning. It's non-committal, yet it sparks the imagination. Now she's not only thinking of the now, she's unconsciously stepping into a role in a story you've begun writing. That's emotional seduction at a whole different level. What's even more underrated is the power of nonverbal micro-leadership. Most guys think control is about being dominant or assertive, but real influence is felt in the small things. Where your eyes rest, how you pause between words, whether you lead the pace of the interaction or follow hers. Think of James Bond. He rarely raises his voice, he doesn't try to impress, yet the room revolves around him. Why? Because his presence decides the emotional tone. He creates contrast, stillness in a chaotic world. And contrast is what draws attention. You can embody this too. Let her talk faster. Let her be expressive. You remain measured, calm, sharp. You're not trying to keep up. You're inviting her into your emotional cadence. And the more she adjusts herself to meet your rhythm, the more you're guiding her emotional state without saying a word. There's also emotional framing through subtle narrative. A man who understands this uses stories, not to entertain but to transfer emotional states. He tells a short anecdote about walking away from a situation that didn't serve him. not in a preachy way, just casually, like it's normal. The unspoken message is, I don't chase, I attract. I have options. I value my peace. And as she listens, she subconsciously compares that emotional standard to her own interactions. If she feels chaotic in comparison, guess what? You now represent the upgrade. She'll start adjusting herself to fit into your emotional world. Let me make something very clear here. Subtle emotional control does not mean turning off your emotions. That's repression. What we're talking about is emotional management. You feel everything, but you choose when and how to express it. That choice is power. Because in a world of men who blurt, chase, confess too soon, get reactive, beg for clarity, the man who remains sovereign in his emotions becomes rare. And what's rare is attractive. Another psychological layer is intermittent validation. This is a game changer. When you compliment a woman at random intervals, not predictably, she begins to crave your approval more. Why? Because the brain releases more dopamine when rewards are unpredictable. This is the same neurochemical principle behind addiction. Casinos use it, social media uses it, and you, as a seducer, can use it ethically. One moment, you acknowledge something unique about her. The next moment, you're fully focused on something else. She doesn't know when the next spike is coming, and that keeps her emotionally engaged. Let's also not forget emotional availability by contrast. This means revealing a glimpse of vulnerability, but only after establishing strength. You say something that hints at depth, not oversharing, just a flash. Maybe you mention something that mattered to you as a kid, then casually move on. That contrast, masculine presence paired with emotional depth, is magnetic, because it humanizes you without softening your frame. And when done at the right time, it makes her feel special, like she's seeing a side of you the world doesn't get. That feeling? That's emotional intimacy. And she will chase it once she tastes it. Now, let's go even deeper. One of the highest forms of emotional influence is controlling what she imagines when you're not around. This is where psychological suggestion comes in. You say things that linger, things that replay in her mind hours later. You say, I like people who surprise me in subtle ways, with eye contact. That single line will echo. Why? Because now she wants to be that surprise. You've set an internal benchmark she wants to meet. You didn't ask for anything. You planted a desire. And now, her actions start aligning with it. That's the game behind the game. And very few men play it. Here's where we enter a territory few men even know exists: the emotional immune system of a woman. Just like the body defends itself from physical threats, the mind defends itself from emotional invasion. That's why women are naturally skeptical of male attention. It's a survival mechanism. But when a man understands how to bypass those defenses, not by force, not by persuasion, but by emotional calibration, he enters the space of influence without resistance. And the way to do that is by becoming emotionally antifragile. This concept, inspired by Nassim Taleb's work, means you don't just stay composed under emotional pressure, you become stronger because of it. You remain grounded when she tests you. You smile when she tries to provoke. You don't flinch when she goes cold. You embrace her emotional unpredictability as part of the dance. And the moment she senses that you are not easily swayed, you become emotionally intriguing. Because now she realizes you don't react like the rest. You don't chase harmony. You create it, or you walk away. This detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've mastered a principle the Stoics lived by. You don't control her behavior, but you always control your response. That quiet inner command creates an emotional vacuum. Because in a world where most men are tossed around by women's moods, you become the lighthouse in the storm. Steady, present, unshaken, and nothing attracts more than that calm authority. Let me give you an example. A woman begins acting cold, distant. Most men will panic. They'll ask, "Are you okay? Did I do something wrong?" And the moment you say that, you've shifted emotional leadership to her. You've told her, "Your behavior controls my peace." But the emotionally intelligent man doesn't say a word. He observes. He listens. He lets the silence do the talking. And then, when he does speak, it's with emotional clarity, not need. He might say, "You don't seem very present right now. I value connection. Let's talk when the vibe is mutual." Simple, clear, firm. And now you've reframed the situation. Instead of reacting to her distance, you've highlighted your standard. That creates respect. Another layer of emotional control lies in your ability to polarize. A lot of men try to be liked. They try to be agreeable, safe, non-threatening. But subtle seduction doesn't thrive in safety. It thrives in polarity. When you're not afraid to disagree, to challenge, to tease, to walk away, you introduce contrast. And contrast is arousing. If she says something you don't align with, you don't nod to keep the peace. You say, "I see it differently." Not to fight, just to hold your truth. That's a form of emotional spine. And it communicates, "I'm not trying to win you. I'm just being me." And ironically, that authentic friction makes her lean in, because now the interaction has flavor, tension, spark. Subtle control also means learning how to lead through emotional ambiguity. You don't always give her a label. You don't always spell out where things are going. You keep things undefined, just enough to create curiosity. This is where the principle of open loops in storytelling comes into play. When something is unresolved, the mind can't rest until it gets closure. So when you say things like, "I enjoy this, for now," or "You're fascinating, but I haven't figured you out yet," you're opening emotional loops, and she wants to close them. That's when she starts investing, emotionally, mentally, physically. Not because you asked, but because you planted a question inside her mind, and now you are the answer. We can also bring in the idea of mystique through restraint. Mystery is not about hiding, it's about revealing slowly. A man who says too much too soon collapses all emotional tension, but a man who reveals just enough, who allows his character to unfold over time, keeps a woman emotionally invested. Think of it like a novel. You don't reveal the twist in the first chapter. You let the tension build. You let her wonder. You let her ask questions. And every time she gets an answer, you leave a better question in its place. That's the difference between the man she dates and the man she obsesses over. This ties into what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency for people to remember unfinished experiences more than finished ones. If you always give her closure, she moves on. If you leave emotional breadcrumbs, small open loops, she keeps revisiting the interaction in her mind. She replays your words. She analyzes your pauses. She starts wondering what you really meant. And the more she imagines, the more emotionally entangled she becomes. You're not controlling her through pressure. You're guiding her attention through suggestion. Now, let's go deeper into a tool most overlook: emotional mirroring with delay. Most people mirror emotions immediately. She smiles, you smile. She gets cold, you get reactive. But when you learn to delay your emotional mirroring, you subtly reset the frame. She teases, you wait, then respond with a slight smirk 3 seconds later. She compliments you, and instead of blushing, you hold her gaze and say, "That's unexpected." That pause, that moment of internal processing, creates dominance. It says, "I filter everything through my own rhythm. I don't mirror you on autopilot. And now, you are the one setting the emotional tone." Finally, let's talk about the power of silence. Inexperienced men fear silence. They rush to fill it. But the seasoned seducer knows. Silence is pressure, and pressure reveals truth. When you hold silence confidently, especially after a bold statement or a question, you create emotional weight. She has to fill the gap. She has to process. She has to feel. And in that moment, you've done something powerful. You've taken control without raising your voice, without doing anything flashy. You've made your presence louder than words. This is the real game. And the deeper you understand it, the more you'll realize. Seduction isn't about making her feel something once. It's about becoming the man who regulates what she feels over time, without ever demanding anything in return. And here's the final truth most men will never grasp. The woman doesn't fall for what you say, or even what you do. She falls for how she feels when she's around you. If you can shape that feeling with subtlety, if you can introduce emotional friction and release with precision, if you can walk away from needing her approval and instead become the one who grants it, she'll be emotionally hooked long before she even realizes it. You won't have to chase, impress, or manipulate. You'll simply be the emotional experience she craves, and that's the highest form of influence a man can ever hold. When you master this level of presence, When you stop trying to control her and instead master your own inner state, you become the kind of man who shapes every room he enters. And when you combine calm dominance with emotional suggestion, restraint with unpredictability, and masculine clarity with strategic silence, you stop being the nice guy and start becoming the man who lingers in her thoughts long after you've left. Now, if this resonated with you, if at any point in this video you felt like I was speaking directly to a part of you that's been hidden, waiting to emerge, then it's time to take that next step. Don't let this just be another video you scroll past. Let it be the spark that sharpens your edge, the beginning of your transformation into a man who doesn't just attract women, but deeply affects them. Leave a comment below with what insight hit you the hardest, or what moment made you rethink your entire approach to women. I want to hear from you. Share this with a brother who needs to hear it, because the world doesn't need more guys chasing attention. It needs more men commanding it, with silence, with presence, and with intention. If you want more content like this, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell, because the next video might just be the one that changes the way you see women and yourself forever.